Yeah, let me just say I appreciate you all being here and taking time out of your week. So let me just offer a word of prayer as we start, if you'll pray with me. Gracious God, thank you for this time tonight to come together to learn, to grow, to reflect more and more about how our faith calls us to reach out beyond ourselves, beyond our church, to care for, to extend the hope of the gospel to those who are in our communities, and particularly those who might need not just a handout, but a help up in this world. So Lord, I just thank you for this time tonight. And I thank you for Peter joining us and for this conversation and this time of reflection. We pray in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
So Peter, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I think most everyone knows, but you are the director of outreach for the Bridge or Mission USA and the Bridge Ministry working in Chicago. So thank you so much again for being here, and I'll turn it over to you, and just appreciate your leading us tonight and then over the next several weeks as well.
Thank you so much, Pastor Smith. I'm really thankful for being allowed to be here, and I'm thankful that First Press has been so involved at the Bridge and Mission USA's ministry. For posterity, I can. This is being recorded. I'll give the full rundown of Mission USA, and the Bridge. But I think pretty much everybody here is at least somehow aware of it. But I'll do it anyway. Basically, for the next 4 weeks, I had sort of a rundown of what I was hoping to get into. For this week, I was looking to get into sort of explaining what Mission USA is, give a little background on myself and how the ministry started and what we do. And then week 2, we were going to be looking at what is ministry and how do we accomplish it. Week 3, being prepared to serve. And then week 4, which is a really helpful one, boundaries and expectations. Very important, particularly when going after something new. I know sometimes people get a little worried about doing something that's different than they've done, and knowing where the right and left limits are can really help. So getting to Mission USA. Mission USA is an organization that helps men and women coming out of prison, getting off drugs, get connected with churches and social services in Chicago. We have aspects of our ministry that go beyond Chicago, but the primary mission field is people returning from prison in Chicago. And before I go on, does everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
I want to talk for 15 minutes and nobody's heard a word. Mission USA started with my boss, Glenn Fitzgerald. He was working as a youth chaplain in a facility in Texas. He's originally from Houston, Texas. And he was working with youth in their sort of version of juvenile hall down there. And did good work for a couple of years. But then as he met and was about to get married to his wife, Jane, they decided they wanted to move up to Chicago. The reason is that Glenn had made contacts with gang members, specifically members of, and there weren't that many down there. And he saw it as a sort of wide open mission field to come to Chicago, where the Latin Kings is one of the more populous gang organizations. And so him and Jane moved up here. And instead of doing chaplaincy, which he had been doing, he was focused on doing actual street outreach. So he began to actually go to where his contacts were at, and essentially do evangelism. He was just, on the street telling people about Jesus, and essentially using the infrastructure of the organization as a tool for evangelism. This worked really, really well. He was able to branch out into other organizations, or sort of allied organizations, if that makes sense. He was working in the Humboldt Park neighborhood, so the near north side. I think his main is sort of like California and North Avenue was his sort of the area, maybe a mile radius around there. And through that work, he noticed a huge issue that was messing with the ministry. And the issue was that he would get these people saved. He would have these conversations. There would be large groups of people that had never been to church before. They had no idea what it was like. He would sort of go by the old school evangelism model of, he'd be like, well, you're here. I see that there is a church 3 blocks down. Let's just go there. And one of the things that Glenn found was that without a social means of connection, those church connections didn't just happen. Which is a really sad thing, I think, because the people that he was reaching were on fire with the Lord. They were ready to make huge changes in their life, but some of them didn't have a suit and tie. Some of them didn't know the language. Some of them didn't know hadn't been there before. And this was in the 90s. So even though the church has a long way to go, back in the 90s, it was even further away from being universally accepting of people with any past. And certainly there were churches that were very accepting. And that's the tricky part. That was what he found was very, very difficult, was figuring out which churches would accept men and women with a past coming out of prison, that were very excited, but didn't really know how to be in church at all, or weren't necessarily confident that they could fit in. So that resulted in the creation of the Bridge program that most of you at this point have all been to. The Bridge is specifically targeted to have pastors from all over the city come and essentially invite the men and women coming out of prison to their church. This solves the problem. And it's not only a problem with street outreach. It was a big problem with people that did prison ministry in general. They'd spend, let's say somebody was in prison for 7 years. There'd be a chaplain. Some poor guy spends 7 years building up this guy, this man or woman, to really be ready for huge changes, ready to, on fire for the Lord and really enthused and really, having a heart of a servant as well. And the 7 years would be up, and that would be it. Imagine you're going to a church for 7 years, because the chapel services in the prison, it's like a church home. You have small groups, you have Bible studies, you have deck prayers where everybody gets together and prays over their families and their cases and all this stuff. You have this church you're involved with, and then you leave. And then that church that you've been involved with 7 years, not only are you not going there anymore, but it sort of ceased to exist. You can't just go back in there on once a week for the Bible study, The Bridge essentially, is solving that problem. That is the purpose of that. Started in 2004. And that's where I will enter into the story. But before I go on, does anybody have any questions about the Bridge or anything I said so far?
Peter, I'm just curious. You mentioned those big national gangs like the Crips or the Bloods or the Latin Kings. How big are they, like in Chicago? How many members would the Latin Kings have here in Chicago? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. And part of the issue with that is that the gangs are more divided than ever now. It is way more factions. And a lot of times you're talking about people within the same organization that are not in agreement with each other.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to give a statistic and be wrong about it. I just wouldn't be able to tell you. But obviously some gangs are either large enough or have enough of sort of a lore that they have them in different cities, like the Vice Lords is something like that. There's a lot of gang real, and they wouldn't have in any other city.
Thank you.
Peter,
Yes.
another question related to the gangs. So when Glenn was in Houston, did he get through his people he knew in Houston, was able to get an introduction to the Latin Kings up here?
That's exactly what happened.
And so some of the people we've known over the time, they were probably Latin Kings, a lot of them.
Yeah, actually at the bridge, there are a couple of people that would have come and probably came at one point while you were there, that were affiliated with, at one time, with the Latin Kings. There's a lot of switching sides where you go to a different organization. So I think specifically the two guys I'm thinking of that he was working with were Latin Kings. They became Insane Spanish Cobras. And then one guy is currently incarcerated that we're actually sending letters to right now, and he was a Latin disciple. So, but yeah, at one point they were Latin Kings, but allegiances shift over time.
So did Glenn find? I mean, the fact that he was widely accepted when he went out there and evangelized, did a lot of these people that he converted, did they feel stuck in some way, and Glenn was offering them sort of an out to sort of transform their lives? Or the fact he was able to make those connections and whatnot?
That's a great question. I think what I'm hearing, let me reflect it back to what I'm hearing you ask is, how did he make connections? Like, what were the circumstances that allowed him to do that?
Yeah.
I'd say there's two circumstances. The one thing is he tried. That it should go without saying, but there wasn't a line leading to the Latin King headquarters when Glenn got there. It was just him. So the other part is there are certain strategies that we use, mainly being respectful is the way that he actually got that done. The goal of this, we're going to talk about this next week. Our first prophecy of the night is figuring out what ministry is and how do we accomplish it. But the main way he did that was by earning the respect of everybody, including the people that were not interested in God at all. I recall a Bible verse about winning the respect of outsiders. And I think we're supposed to do that. Kellen can tell me if I'm wrong. It's very unpopular now, but that's essentially how you do it. I mean, when you're going to a gang controlled area, you are going to somebody else's culture, and you're trying to, it's cross-cultural ministry. If you don't do cross-cultural ministry respectfully, it is very easy to dismiss someone that is disrespectful. And they have a very unpleasant way of doing that. But most of the time it'll just be, you got to leave. And why would you not leave? But it's not hard when you're respectful. It's, in his case, a lot of the time it was, there'd be a gang leader, and he would say, this kid that wants to get involved in the gang, he's too smart. He has no business being in there. I can't tell him to leave because that jeopardizes my position. But if you start working with him and he decides he wants to, straighten his life out, I'm going to support you 100%. And a lot of good ministry happened that way.
To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense that they would effectively push somebody out.
Yeah, well, it's it's weird for us to think about this. I want us to get our mind around this as far as what a gang is. This has to do with actually my job too, in the opposite direction. Imagine when you went to work for your dad and your cousins and your uncles and every single person in the family. However, your relatives, it was like a foster care system that you were all in at the same time. So you didn't have a boss. When somebody told you to go sell drugs, it wasn't your boss telling you to do that, it was your dad. That makes it make a little more sense, because the person that is running the organization views his underlings as employees, but also as kids. So if you have a really smart kid, and of course these guys aren't dumb, they know what this life does to you. You know, it's not, we can hide behind pride a little bit, but you know, if you get to the point where you're in a position of authority, as my friend Jeff says, you know what's happening, and you know that this kid is too smart, and you also know how to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize your position, and you want to, because it's not just an employee, it's a kid that you care about. I know that's weird, and it's really a psychologist would call it maladaptive, and it very much is, but that's the reality.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a great explanation. It makes sense the way you're approaching that. I mean, for us to understand. Wow.
Yeah, it's like with cross-cultural ministry, you know, if we were going to Borneo and doing cross-cultural ministry, we would need to learn Malaysian, I think. We would need to learn a different language that I don't know. In order to, and it might not even be Malaysian, it might be something else. There are cultural languages that are not written or spoken, but they are practiced. And you learn what the practices are, and most of the time, if you're willing to submit to that process, it's pretty easy to work within those confines. It's very similar when you're going into prison to do ministry. Going to prison, doing one of the parts of my job, I'm all over the place right now, but one of the parts of my job is I organize our chaplaincy at Division 11 of Cook County Jail, under non-pandemic circumstances, of course. And one of the things about that is there are a lot of rules we do not have an option of following or not. We have to follow the rules. However, the rules change every week, but the rule of having to follow it does not change. That's the culture. The culture is, if I say it's a rule, it's a rule. And unless you have a form signed by somebody that is a superior to me, it's not going to change. Luckily, my spiritual gift is getting the form signed by the superior. Doesn't sound very spiritual, but very, very important in those types of situations. But anyway, stop me if you want me to don't want me to keep going, but I'm going to give you the part where I enter into the history of the bridge. When the bridge started in 2004, Glenn needed someone to do music for it. The person he got was my best friend from college, Jed Brewer. And within the first couple months, he had asked me to play bass with him in the worship band for the bridge. I was finishing up my schooling. For those of you who don't know, I was a classical musician. I played the double bass in orchestras touring around Chicago and the Midwest. And the bridge was a really cool thing, though, because a lot of times for a professional musician, all of my work was on the weekend. So I wasn't really able to have a normal church life. Saturday night was a concert in a different state. Sunday afternoon was a concert in the same state. I could make the 6-hour round trip to go to a church, or I could go to a random church in Des Moines or South Bend. But the bridge really helped because Tuesday tended to be a night that I was more available. There was less going on in music on Tuesdays for me. It was helped more when I met my Tasha. We just 10-year bridge in last August. But we met when we were both finishing up school. And one of the things that really changed both of our lives was that the bridge was something we would do together. She actually ended up doing a graduate program in Baton Rouge. We were 2 years of long distance before she came up to Chicago and we got married. But in that time, whenever she was home, the bridge was something we were sort of always counting on. And she loved helping people. She encouraged me to do it. When we got married, jail was how we started together. You know, we started serving in the ministry by being jail volunteers. This was back in 2010. We started, we weren't running it then, we were just there. And over the course of 2 years, eventually we had a staff member leave and I ended up running the sort of coordinating volunteers and making sure we all got in to the county jail. We were in Division 2 then. We had to reapply in 2014 because we were having trouble getting Glenn, and we had a new staff member named Matt King. We were having trouble getting in under, because we were going in under someone else's umbrella. So since 2014, we've had our own service that we've been able to get our own volunteers, and it's been really cool. In that time, we've had 4 or 5 different bridge pastors that were a part of our team that were like, and that's very powerful because the guys, when they saw the pastors come in, we were like, hey, the pastors can't wait till you come out to the bridge. We want to see you in here. We also had we still have a person that runs a very large homeless shelter on the north side, and a guy that was involved with he was actually a lawyer, but was doing work with victims of unlawful evictions. And a great guy, we've known him for a long time. But so we were doing those jail services. And then I think in 2016 is when I became the director of outreach. And what I did there was it was my job to get people that knew about the bridge but didn't know how to get there, when it was, all of this kind of stuff, and make sure they were able to get there. So been doing that for about 5 years. And since then, that's when I went on staff. Since then, we continued the chaplaincy, continued the outreach. I also run all of our training programs for new staff, as well as deacons. The deacon program was also something I started. Deacons are guys that are coming out of prison that want to help us to run the bridge. And they do various capacities. We have a deacon that helps people get jobs. We have a deacon that helps people get housing. We have a deacon that helps people find 12-step meetings in their area. Deacons that bring them to the church of their choosing on Sunday. And we've had other deacon roles. Every deacon has a role. I'm trying to remember all of them. But right now we have 2 long-term deacons, and then we're currently training 3, including our first 2 female deacons. So that's a really cool thing. And we've been doing a lot of that, a lot of time for training sessions in the last year. And then we've been, since March of 2020, we've been doing the bridge virtually. We haven't missed a week. We're looking to get it started once the proper authorities tell us that it is safe to have 80 people in a room. And I feel like we're close, but we're not there yet. But that's basically most of what I do. I'm sure I missed some of it. Any questions about that before I get to a few stories from the mission field?
Yeah, Peter, you just triggered a thought. You mentioned you all gathered together again at the church, 80 strong. What percentage of the people with whom you deal there have been vaccinated or
Great question.
believe in vaccinations?
That's a good question. Believe in vaccinations, for a lot of our people that we work with, they don't have to worry about believing in it because it wasn't their choice. So anybody that's coming out and gets vaccinated,
Okay.
they're not in a position to have thoughts and opinions on it. And if they were, they would not really be, thought of. Our team was vaccinated by a total stroke of dumb luck through the county. The county called us and said, we are vaccinating people and we would like the religious services volunteers to get vaccinated if they want. And apparently we were the only people that took them up on it, basically. I don't know what to tell you. But as far as our team was, our deacons, it took them a little longer, but they're either fully vaccinated or waiting for the second shot, like in a week or something. And then our institutional partners, like the drug rehabs that we work with that have people come to the bridge and stuff like that, they're all vaccinated as well. They do that in-house. So really, the vaccination rate of people that come to the bridge, particularly for the first week, is going to be like 100%, because we're probably going to not be at 80 just from attrition when we start back up again. I mean, if my thing is, if we get 40 people in there all around, I'll consider that a pretty huge win, given that it's been a year and over a year. But yeah, so there's more to say about that, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I have a few stories, basically divided into stories from the chaplaincy, stories from the bridge, stories about outreach, and then stories about the training. So a really cool story from my first year doing work at the county was we were doing a chapel service, and it was a larger attended service. We sort of mixed it up because we split the room with a different guy who did services in Spanish, but sometimes he wasn't there, so we do the whole thing. And this week we were preaching, and one of the things that happens in a chapel service at the jailhouse is sometimes there will be sort of whispering, and theoretically it's people that are coming to do gang related business during the chapel service. It is usually hardly noticeable, and when it's noticeable, we do something about it, but we're not there to stop people from whispering. We're there to tell people about Jesus. So but one of the times it got a little out of hand, and one of the guys from the service stepped up and said, hey, look, this isn't right. You guys are here doing this business. It's not okay. You got to get out of here. And at first, this was my first year. I was like 6 months in. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what was going to happen. But immediately, another guy, one of the guys that was gang affiliated, stands up and is like, I understand, but what you need to understand is I was getting a lot out of this. I want everybody to stop talking right now, because I know I'm affiliated and everything like that, but I'm surprised that I want to hear about this. Like, I want to be here. Please let me be here. And I really loved that story, because in the mind of the guy that stood up, he was doing something totally right. He was sticking up for, maybe even for me, for us, that we're doing it, certainly sticking up for God in his mind. But the thing that he was missing was he didn't see the possibilities. What it would mean for the service if the guy that was gang affiliated decided that he actually wanted to follow God, how that would change his own life, the lives of those around him, maybe even the life of the guy that was complaining about it. His life might have gotten a lot better from that guy not being involved in stuff. Seeing the possibilities is something we train people to do in our, we have a 5-month-long training for the deacons and the staff. And it's a very important part of any ministry, is the ability to look at a situation that is almost totally messed up and find something good out of it. It's really easy to think, this is the, have you ever just seen something like, this is never going to work? You know what I'm talking about? You just see like someone's trying to do something. It's like, oh, there's just no way. How? Why? The thing about ministry is that almost none of it should work at all. There was a little kid that brought 7 loaves and 5 fishes to Jesus. There was 5,000 people there. That should not have worked. You know what I'm saying? Like, the history of ministry is things that shouldn't have worked that worked. Think of all of the heroes in the faith, in the Bible and out of the Bible. Augustine as a church leader should not have worked. Martin Luther should not have worked. Like, these are insane things that actually happened. So seeing the possibilities really impressed on me sort of what could happen. And the result was we had a lot of people that were gang affiliated that hardly ever talked, hardly ever passed notes, were super into what we were talking about, and have since made huge changes in their lives. We've had past deacons from that chapel service for years that we're still in contact with. One day want to come back in there with us, that were as gang affiliated as it was, but caught a gear and, you know, made changes. A story from the Bridge. One of my jobs at the Bridge is helping people with job searches. I had a guy at the Bridge come up to me one week, and he was at a drug rehab. So he'd only been there for like a week. He was maybe a week or 2 sober. And he came up to me, he's like, Pete, I got to get a job now. When you are a week sober, that is not the time for a job. That's the time to get a 2nd week sober. There's no time like the present to start stacking those weeks of sobriety up. But of course, the thing is, I could say you don't need a job, you need to be sober. But that's the kind of thing that would get you in trouble, as we talked about earlier. That would be called disrespectful. We don't want to do that, as we've described earlier. So I was like, well, tell me about it. What's the rush? What's going on? There's a lot of issues that can be, you know, sometimes they are running out of time. That wasn't his case, but he needed to get an apartment and the timing crunch, and that's a little different. And so I was asking, like, what's going on? And he was like, well, you know, I can't really wait until a month in, because that's how long they want you to wait before even looking for a job. And I was like, yeah, you know, I'll help you, just tell me why. And he's like, you know, because I basically said, I'm going to help you do this. Just, I'm curious as to what's going to happen. He said, well, here's the thing. I've got this lady and she's about to get put out and she doesn't have anywhere to go. I need to get a job so I can support her. And I said, wow, that's amazing. I'm going to stop right there. What was the real reason he wanted that job?
Because of the woman.
To have, to connect with her. One word.
Exactly. This is a standard case of something that you might have heard called the wrong tool for the wrong job. A job is a great thing that does a lot of things for everybody. A relationship is a good thing. Like, but these are not related things. It's not the idea of, you know, what went wrong here is there was a way for him to get help that would have been have her talk to me. I can help her get a job. I'm not discriminating against getting women jobs. I get women jobs all the time. We have men jobs, women jobs. I don't care. Like, in his mind, though, he was looking at this as the purpose of this job is to satisfy another person. And in in recovery, and particularly when people are coming out of jail, understanding people's solve can really help us when we're serving people. The word we have for this is felt needs. My friend had the felt need for a job. He felt very strongly that he needed to get a job. But there was an underlying problem that the job wasn't going to solve. Because even if he had gotten the job, they might not have stayed together. She might have gotten the money, and then he would have needed some for himself, and she might have said, hey, it's not my job to manage your money for you. Like, these are the kind of things that happen. He wasn't prepared for that. It was this, the situation is set up for failure. And when we're helping people, one of the things we want to do is not disregard felt needs. It's tempting to do that. We want to say, you don't need a job, you need recovery, and you need Jesus. And then we'll worry about the job later. It's true, but totally not helpful. If the result of someone saying that to you would rightly be, even though they're 100% right, you totally disregarding everything they're saying from now on. This is responding to people's felt needs helps us to earn the right to be heard when we're doing ministry. A story from outreach. And this actually relates to earning the right to be heard as well. So we had a guy that came to the bridge for a long time, and he went to a different facility. He still wanted to come to the bridge. We have we have vans that take people from where they live to the bridge, so that it's a little safer that way. Everybody, there's ministry time in the car as well, and encouraging them and taking care of needs that weren't met at the service. So at the new place, though, we didn't go pick anybody up. So we wanted to start doing that because this guy we'd known for a long time was there, and he vouched for us. And so I went to the place that he was living. I went to the guy at the front desk and I said, hey, I'm here. This guy, told you I was coming, hopefully. And the guy at the desk looked at me. He said, and I told him I wanted to give sort of a, little outreach, a little encouragement to the people at the, facility. And he looked at me, squint, I face back like this, and said, "Are you some sort of politician?" I love that story. In his mind, there's no reason for me to be there at all unless I'm trying to get something out of you. This is one of the aspects of cross-cultural ministry. Particularly if somebody doesn't know you, they will have preconceived notions that are 100% wrong. We can get mad that they're wrong. That won't help us do ministry. Or we can see them coming and recognize nobody has to listen to me. I'm a man of God, but nobody has to listen to what I say. I find it amazing that you are still on this Zoom call, because you could have turned it off. It would have been modern technology has made turning Zoom calls off one of the easier things in life, and yet you're still here. And for this guy, I said, I'm not a politician. I'm a man of God. I basically explained everything I explained to you, and he was like, okay. He wasn't certainly buying it, but it was enough to not get me immediately kicked out. Everything we do at the bridge and everything we do with our chaplaincy and our training and sort of small groups we've been having has been based on the idea of earning the right to be heard. When a person knows who you are, knows that you care about them, all of a sudden your willingness to get into the really difficult stuff that's holding you back in life goes up tremendously. And there really isn't a replacement for it. You can't be charismatic enough for that to not matter. You can't be smart enough You can't be learned enough. You know, either you trust a person with your deep, dark secret or you don't. And the people that we work with have a lot of deep, dark secrets, and they won't get anywhere in life without actually expressing it and coming up with plans, strategies, coping mechanisms, etc. So the last, I got, let me see, we're at a few minutes left here. Last do is training and discipleship. And I'll tell two deacon stories. One is one of our deacons is a guy named Jeff Bryant. He was a longtime gangster disciple from the early era, probably about 2 or 3 removed from Larry Hoover, if anybody knows what that name is. Jeff was involved with the Bridge for quite a while, and actually became a deacon somewhat by accident. There were 2 guys that were trying to have be deacons, and one of them sort of fell off. But Jeff kept coming and kept up the good work. But he, at one point, we had a weekly training meeting. At this point, we were doing one-on-one discipleship, and we had a meeting, and he was like, you know, you keep saying for me to tell people I love them. I don't want to do that. I don't want to tell somebody I love them, because that might make me have to do stuff I don't want to do. And I hate it when people lie to me like that and say something that they don't mean it. And we talked through it. We actually figured it out. And essentially what I was telling him is, you love people already. You could be anywhere you want to be right now. You could go to a different meeting. You could stay home. You have chosen to come to the Bridge to help people, to encourage people, to listen to their problems. You've gone through 5 months of this training when you didn't have to. There was nothing keeping you there except for the pleasure of my company. That's not enough. And so what I essentially told him, I was like, you have a burdened heart for the people in there. You want to see people that are coming out of prison, people that are getting off drugs. You want to see their life changed, and you're willing to make sacrifices to do that. What other word is there than love for that? And he admitted that it was right. So I was like, so basically, you're doubting what everybody else is seeing. You're the only one. Everybody else knows you love them. Might as well say it. And I still remember the first time he's like, I can honestly say I love you here. Even if we've never met before, I love you because of God, because of what God has done for me, and because of the love God has for me. And that was a huge help to him in reaching out to people, because he was the kind of guy that he wasn't really a friendly kind of person. He was a really serious person. And he didn't like it when people were playing around. He didn't like people that were, sort of, he didn't like that. But this helped him a lot. The last thing I really want to make sure I don't go over. The last story I'll tell you, I heard today, actually. We were in our training earlier today, and one of the new deacons was sort of a trustee or on staff at sort of part-time staff at the drug recovery he was staying at. And he was in the elevator with other people. And one of the people in the elevator saw that he had a badge on from the facility. And they're like, wait a second, why is he working here? He's one of us. He's the same kind of addict that we are. And our deacon Tito went to the person and was like, you know what? You're 100% right. I've done everything you have. I'm not going to argue with you on it. I'm just grateful that I get to be here and that we get to go through this together. The person said a few more things, but as they got off the elevator, they told him, look, this was about me. This had nothing to do with you. I'm having a hard day, and I really appreciate you not, your grace on that. And he had no problem doing that. Tito had earned credibility by not pretending he was anything different than he was. There was nothing magical. When he got the badge, it didn't magically turn him into an authority figure to be respected. He was the same person. And really all he had was clean time and enough social capital to be trusted with very little. But he continues to be faithful with little. And that's really what, in my mind, when you're trying to build credibility with a mission field, a cross-cultural mission field, that being faithful with very little credibility is what we need. Any final thoughts? Any final questions?
You're probably going to cover this in a succeeding week, but I'm curious as to how you find jobs and how you find housing for these people.
Awesome. Yeah, we might cover that pretty much. It's something that could be covered every week. We have the processes that we use are largely based on that principle of seeing the possibilities. Sometimes there are possibilities and sometimes there are different possibilities. I'll tell a story that proves that there's always possibilities by showing you a time that there was not a possibility. There was a guy that came to the bridge and he said, "Pete, I'm looking for a job." And I said, "Well, there's a lot of them out there. Look, they're all around us." I didn't really say that. And I said, "Okay, well," I gave him a few options that I knew. There's several places that are pretty consistently hiring, and within, I knew he had like a fair amount of time before he needed to start paying rent. So, wouldn't be difficult for him to at least get one paycheck in before then. And I showed him the place to go, and he's like, "Well, here's the problem. I can't work standing up. Everything has to be cash under the table, and it can't be outside." And there were two. Now at that point, there are two ways I can respond to that. The first way is that job doesn't exist, which is true. That job really, really doesn't exist. Or I can say, I'm going to be on the lookout for that. Let me know if you're interested in other possibilities that don't necessarily fit into that. Because ultimately what our goal with job placement is job placement is not the purpose of Mission USA or the Bridge. The purpose is getting people connected with churches and getting people's spiritual needs met. The reason we do the job stuff is so that when people have needs, we do not ignore them. Because ignoring needs communicates that we are not interested in earning the right to be heard with them. So the way we do job stuff is largely based on availability. It's based on location. Every job I'm looking for is accessible via CTA, because we're able to use CTA passes to get people to the jobs. Even if it's sort of far away, we have benevolence set aside for bus passes that we use fairly often. Things like steel-toed boots and stuff like that. So the process is really just finding what's available at the time and case managing. Sort of going through every person's different, every situation's different. So it's hard to, there really isn't a single pathway, and I kind of don't want there to be a single pathway for getting jobs, because let's say we get a huge company and they want to hire everybody, that works until the company doesn't need anybody, and then we're back to square one. Now, that being said, when there's possibilities like that we have a guy that we work with that runs a construction company, and every once in a while, maybe once in 6 months, pre-pandemic, of course, he'll call me up and say, "Hey, who do you have?" And then I want to make sure it works. So it's, I figure out somebody where we can actually, it's sort of matchmaking at that point. Mm-hmm. But in general, what it has more to do with is figuring out what the opportunities are, what the person's skill set is, and just trying to get something that fits, or at least, encourage a direction.
So what have you done during COVID?
Well, a lot of those means are still open. A lot of temp agencies are still in operation. The main thing is anything food service or that kind of stuff. Everybody knows that's not happening. So I haven't gotten a lot of people asking for that. But what we've done mainly since COVID is manufacturing type stuff. Opportunity there. The volume has gone down a lot because of not meeting in person. A lot of people that, it's just there's a lot less rules about there's a lot less kicking people out of where they're staying for public safety. So, but there's obviously plenty of opportunity. We got somebody connected with a post-prison welding program, which is really cool. And but mainly manufacturing is the way I've been going.
Mhm.
Are you acquainted with Lewis Dooley?
I don't think so. Tell me where he works or what's his
He's
deal.
with Emmaus and Set Free Ministries. And I think many of the members of our congregation met him when he taught a Sunday school class one time. Kellen, you know Lewis. And Lewis has got an awful lot of credibility. He was convicted of attempted murder and a few other things and sentenced to 3 life terms plus 100 years. And I haven't seen Lewis for about 10 days, but he and I are very close. So he's doing work in Cook County as well as other prisons.
That's
he
great.
spoke- He spoke at the church last year, maybe, John. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it was
Yeah, it was
maybe a
a
couple of years
year
ago.
and a half ago or so, yeah.
Now I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been quite
Do you
familiar.
have, do you have numbers, Peter, of people that pass through the bridge who stay clean, stay healthy?
It's a good question. Well, everybody that's at the bridge is staying healthy. That's
Well, yes, but I mean, as they go beyond,
yeah. We obviously we're a pretty small operation. We don't have a statistician. When we were pre-COVID, we were looking at probably seeing. Man, I had such better numbers of this a year and a half ago. Because I sort of based it on how long they would stay at stay coming to the bridge. And I know that we were beating recidivism by quite a bit. Recidivism is 37 after a year, and we were 80% after a year.
excellent. Wow, okay.
Jeez.
But that is recidivism numbers. That's not using numbers. And there are, one of the things we didn't get to is how we dealt with people that came to the bridge that were intoxicated. There's a whole other story about that. Maybe I'll save it for next week. So people backslide. That's relapses. Some people say relapse is a part of recovery. Not everybody agrees to that, but certainly relapse is a part of the lives of people who have recovered. So that is the stone cold fact that I witnessed. So.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for being with us for part 1 tonight. Appreciate you giving this background and story, and look forward to the next installment.
Awesome. I can't wait. Thank you guys so much for having me.